Good morning, everyone, and hello, Professor Battle. My name is Jullius Wllhausen, and this morning I'll be summarizing my paper on the life and work of Jullius Wllhausen, one of the most influential Old Testament scholar in history. Let's start by getting to know who Wllhausen was. The name and background of the scholar. Julius Wllhausen was born in Hamelin, Germany in 1844 and he lived until 1918. He grew up in a Lutheran pastor's home, so he was raised with a strong foundation in biblical studies and theology. He studied at the University of Göttingen, where he focused on Oriental languages, ancient history, and theology, working under some of the top scholars of his time like Heinrich Ewald and Bernhard Stein. At first, he trained to be a minister, but he later shifted to secular academic work so he could focus on the historical literary analysis of biblical texts. He taught at major universities across Germany, including Göttingen, Halle, and Marburg, and he also wrote about Islamic history and Arabic literature. But his most famous work was on the Old Testament. His key publications include Prolegomena to the History of Israel in 1881 and the composition of the Statutes in 1889. Now that we know a bit about his life, let's look at what he's best known for, the major contribution of his work. Wllhausen made three major contributions to Old Testament scholarship, but his most famous work was refining and popularizing the documentary hypothesis. This theory argues that the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, traditionally attributed to Moses, was actually compiled from 4 distinct sources written over centuries. The Yahweh's source, from around 950 BCE, which uses Yahweh for God and focuses on stories. The Elohist source, from around 850 BCE, which uses Elohim and emphasizes theology. The Deuteronomist source, from around 621 BCE, linked to the King Josiah's reform. The priestly source, from around 500 BCE, which focuses on rituals and structure. Wllhausen said these sources were woven together after the Babylonian exile. His second major contribution was an evolutionary model of Israelite religion. He argued that Israel's faith did not start as strict monotheism. Instead, it developed from henotheism to monotheism over time, shaped by social and political changes. Third, he analyzed the Deuteronomistic history, the book of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, arguing they were edited to teach that Israel's success or failure depended on obedience to God's law. These ideas completely changed how scholars studied the Old Testament. The strength of his work. One major strength of Wllhausen's work is that it forced scholars to take the Bible seriously as a historical and literary text. Before his time, many people simply accepted traditional authorship claims without questioning the text's complexity, like why there are different stories or laws in the Pentateuch. Wllhausen focused on source analysis, help us see how biblical texts were shaped by their original context and how they connect to the culture of the ancient Near East. His work also encouraged scholars to look at the Bible as a collection of texts that develop over time, which has enriched our understanding of this book, of what this book meant to their first readers. Even scholars who disagree with him today say his work laid the groundwork for modern biblical scholarship. The weakness of his work. However, Wllhausen's work also has important weaknesses. The biggest one is that he relied heavily on 19th century ideas about progress. The belief that all societies and religion evolved from primitive to advanced form. This led him to assume Israelite religion developed in a straight line, which we now know is not true. Archaeological evidence from recent decades shows that monotheistic ideas existed in neighboring cultures earlier than Wllhausen thought, and that Israel's faith was more complex than his model suggests. Also, while he claimed to be objective, his work sometimes minimized or ignored the possibility of divine inspiration, which is important to many believers who see the Bible as more than just a human product. Another witness is that he did not always account for how ancient authors might have intentionally woven together different traditions to make theological points, rather than just compiling separate sources. My personal evaluation of his work. For me, Wllhausen's work is both important and challenging. On one hand, I think his focus on historical context is really valuable. It helps us understand the Bible better and see how it speaks to the world it was written in. His ideas have pushed the church and scholars to think more deeply about what the Bible is and how we should read it. On the other hand, I think his approach can be limiting for believers like me who see the Bible as divinely inspired. While I appreciate that he helped us see the text complexity, I don't think we have to choose between viewing the Bible as historical and viewing it as God's Word. Overall, I think Wllhausen was a brilliant scholar whose work changed the field forever. Even if we don't agree with all of his conclusion, his legacy reminds us that studying the Bible requires both analysis and humility because there's always more to learn. To sum up, Julius Wllhausen was a groundbreaking scholar who reshaped how we study the Old Testament. His work has a strength that still influences us today, but it also has weaknesses that modern research has addressed. Thank you all for listening, and Professor Dr. Battle, I hope the summary gives you a clear look at my paper's finding. I'm happy to answer any question.